Imagine an empire so massive it literally spanned 3 continents, controlled the world's most vital trade routes, and stuck around for over 6 centuries. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to step directly into the shoes of a historian to trace the chronological epic of the Ottoman Empire. We're going to look closely at the historical evidence to understand exactly how this transcontinental powerhouse came to be, how it actually functioned, and how it constantly evolved over time.
So as historians, we've got to start our narrative by asking the ultimate question. How on earth did a fragmented nomadic group, whose origins trace all the way back to the Altai Mountains in Central Asia, manage to build a transcontinental superpower that lasted right into the modern era? Well, let's dive into this and find out.
Section 1. From Nomads to Principality. Our story kicks off in the 13th century. Now, following the completely devastating Mongol invasions, the previous big player in the region, the Seljuk Sultanate, basically collapsed. And this created a massive power vacuum, leaving Anatolia super fragmented into these small competing warlord domains. But right there on the borderlands, a leader named Osman I was quietly setting up a small principality in the Bithynia region. And Osman's strategy was absolutely brilliant. You see, instead of picking fights with the stronger Turkish neighbors to his east, he positioned his people right on the frontier of the weakening Byzantine Empire. They were perfectly situated to just absorb Byzantine territories and steadily push westward. So how exactly did Osman fuel this incredibly rapid expansion? Well, it all comes down to the Ghazis. These guys were fiercely motivated frontier warriors, and they were driven by this cultural tradition of holy war and continuous expansion against non-Muslim territories. Early Ottoman success really banked on harnessing that specific military zeal. Osman and the leaders who followed him managed to attract thousands of fleeing nomads to their banner. And let's be totally honest here, these fighters were driven by religious fervor, sure, but also by the highly lucrative, very practical promise of plunder and booty in those newly conquered lands.
Section 2. Forging the War Machine.
Now, as this little principality grew into a genuine empire and actually crossed the Dardanelles over into Europe, those simple, unpredictable tribal structures just weren't cutting it anymore. To manage multiple fronts, Sultan Murad I realized he desperately needed a new systematic approach. His solution? Ruthless but highly effective. It was called the Devshirme system. Think of it essentially as an institutionalized blood tax. The state would conscript young Christian boys from the Balkans, teach them Turkish culture and Islam, and then put them through incredibly intense military and administrative training. They weren't allowed to marry or take up other trades. Instead, they were deployed as the Janissaries, a highly disciplined elite force that answered to literally no one but the Sultan himself.
This shift is a massive game changer for the empire. You're seeing the Ottomans adapt to the huge complexities of running an expanding state. They're swapping out those unpredictable, autonomous tribal horsemen for a highly disciplined, salaried infantry wielding modern firearms. It's a monumental transition, really. It essentially handed the Sultan this centralized muscle of absolute, unswerving loyalty.
Section 3. Crisis and the Interregnum. Just when the Ottoman war machine seemed entirely unstoppable, they were securing monumental victories and literally crushing Crusader armies at Kosovo in 1389 and Nicopolis in 1396, total disaster struck. In 1402, Sultan Bayezid I pushed eastward and ran right into the fearsome nomadic conqueror Tamerlane at the Battle of Ankara. Bayezid was overwhelmingly defeated and, shockingly enough, captured alive. This was a devastating setback. It plunged the Ottomans into an 11-year civil war known as the Interregnum, with his sons ruthlessly fighting each other for the throne. It actually wasn't until 1413 that Mehmed I finally managed to pull the pieces back together and restore the shattered empire.
Section 4. Capturing the Red Apple.
So, with the empire miraculously back in one piece under Mehmed I and then further stabilized by his son Murad II, the internal borders were finally secure again. The stage was set for the ultimate imperial prize. See, there was this legendary, almost mythical milestone known in Muslim tradition as the Red Apple, the conquest of the Byzantine capital, Constantinople. There was even a fascinating 9th century prophecy from Al-Kindi that said he will conquer Constantinople and rule over the whole earth will be his. The young, incredibly ambitious Sultan Mehmed II, who took power in 1451, was absolutely determined to fulfill that prophecy and lock in his absolute, centralized power over the nobility. And on May 29, 1453, he actually did it. Mehmed, now known forever as the Conqueror, took the city. And we really can't overstate how much this matters. This wasn't just a simple change in management. It was the final, definitive end of the ancient Roman world. Mehmed actually went ahead and claimed the title Kaiser Rum, or Roman Caesar, because he viewed himself as the legitimate heir to Rome itself. He didn't just leave the city in ruins either. He rapidly repopulated it with skilled artisans from all different faiths, totally transforming it into a bustling, multi-ethnic, centralized capital. This gave him the ultimate governmental base to launch a whole new era of worldwide dominion.
Section 5. The Zenith of Power.
Fast forward to the 16th century, and that highly centralized administrative state built by Mehmed the Conqueror has completely paved the way for the absolute golden age of the empire. This is under the rule of Suleiman the Magnificent. Under Suleiman, the empire truly hit its absolute zenith. We're talking borders extending deep into Hungary, the Arab world, and all across North Africa. His reign is the true apogee of Ottoman might. The empire was functioning as this massive, self-sufficient, mercantilist powerhouse that tightly controlled the major international trade routes connecting the East and the West.
But here's the thing, this golden age wasn't just restricted to land conquests. The Ottomans actively expanded into the Mediterranean with a really brilliant, if kinda unorthodox strategy. They basically looked at the most terrifying pirate lords of the Mediterranean and just put them on the state payroll. By allying with legendary corsairs like Hayreddin Barbarossa, who Suleiman actually made Grand Admiral, the Ottomans transformed into a dominant naval superpower. They annexed Algiers, used it to fund a new imperial fleet, captured Tunis, and heavily raided Habsburg territories. They became an absolutely formidable force dominating the waters of the central Mediterranean.
Section 6. A Historian's Final Verdict.
As we start to wrap up our chronological epic, we've got to address a massive shift in how modern historians view the centuries that followed that big 16th century golden age. For literally decades, history textbooks pushed something called the Ottoman decline thesis. This was the long-held but now completely obsolete narrative that, after Suleiman, the empire just entered this permanent period of medieval stagnation. The old story went that the Janissaries simply became corrupt, the economy hopelessly failed because European trade routes were bypassing them, and the empire just slowly withered away into backwardness.
But modern historians, they have completely rewritten this story. They've totally debunked that decline myth. What earlier historians mistook for the breakdown of the traditional cavalry system was actually a conscious, highly pragmatic modernization. The Ottomans were adapting to the times. They shifted their focus toward a massive, musket-wielding infantry so they could actually match European armies on the battlefield. They were transitioning the state from being this pure military conquest machine into a territorially stable, diplomatic bureaucracy.
So I want to leave you with this final kind of provocative thought. If the Ottoman Empire was supposedly just declining for over 300 years, how on earth did it successfully adapt to remain a formidable global power all the way until the 20th century? History is rarely as simple as a straight line of rise and fall. An empire that supposedly spent centuries just dying out somehow managed to continuously innovate, restructure its military, engage in complex European diplomacy, and survive right up to the modern era. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this historical journey has given you a fresh perspective on the true epic of the Ottoman Empire.